that we have established it recently as a multi-phased coalition supported from the General Secretariat of Communication and Information of Aristotle University, of Journalistic Union of Thessaloniki and Thrace, of the Athenians news agencies, of the public television, of the regional authority of Central Macedonia, the municipality of Thessaloniki. It's a very important initiative, and among the most important aspect of it, it will be this one about female journalists. Having said that, I will pass the floor back to Mr. Kotsifos and the presidium. Thank you very much.
Thank you too, and I would also like to thank all of you for joining us today to discuss with Pamela Morinière and Sophia Papadopoulou. Elodie Vialle is not there yet, but she will join us in a few minutes' time, about an issue that has been alarming the journalist community for quite a long time now. But still, we believe that in terms of the public's awareness, in terms of the employers' awareness, and even in terms of the journalist unions' tasks, it still has not been as high in the agenda as needed. So therefore, and as this new training center is trying to develop some fields that we need to work a lot with trainings in the future, we thought that it would be quite important to have this discussion and to try not just to identify best practices that are shared through different surveys or through the work of different organizations, but also try to have some material shared from personal experience. And that's why we have our colleague Sophia Papadopoulou from the public service media, from the public news agency in Greece, who will share with us later her own experience as she had to face herself threats because of her reporting, but also try to identify material that we could use for future trainings. And there we would need the help of Pamela Morinière. Pamela Morinière is working for the International Federation of Journalists. She is the gender officer of the federation, and she has done a lot of work around the issue of gender-based harassment online and offline, of course. So Pamela, I would thank you once again for being with us today, and maybe you could just help us firstly to have a common understanding of what we actually are talking about when we talk about online harassment of female journalists, and then introduce us to the major findings of different surveys that the International Federation has conducted so far about the issue.
Thank you very much, Yannis, and thank you for having me today, and good afternoon, everybody. It's a great pleasure to be here. For those of you who don't know the IFJ, it's the International Federation of Journalists. It represents journalists, unions, and associations across the world. We have around 180, more than 180 members to date. And the issue of online harassment of women journalists, is a very key issue. It's a very core component of our activities. So I'm very pleased I can introduce you to some of the things that we've been doing. I just wanted to start by saying that we've launched a campaign which is called You Are Not Alone. And this is what I'm going to talk about today. It's a campaign that has been going on for a couple of years now, with a number of initiatives that I'm going to introduce to you. But I'm not sure about the level of knowledge that everyone has, but I suspect there are lots of journalists in this virtual room. So I'm sure some of the things that I'm going to talk about you are familiar with, unfortunately. But because I didn't know exactly, forgive me if I say some things that are very obvious to you. A few days ago, we've published on our website another story on online harassment. It was posted on a blog, and it was the story of a woman journalist in India who had published an article interviewing the partner of a political prisoner. And following this article, she has received a lot of abuse online. And when she asked for support from her colleagues, from her family, from her friends, nobody stood with her. And this illustrates very much why we have launched this campaign. It's because we want women journalists to understand that they are not alone and that we're going to speak with a collective voice to support them. Because if we don't, the only way out for many of our female colleagues is retreat, and this is a massive problem, not only for the journalists, but also for society as a whole, because another voice is going to be silenced, and because pluralism is going to suffer from it. So we launched our campaign, You Are Not Alone, #YouAreNotAlone in 2018. But we have actually been extremely concerned about this issue for more than a decade, I would say, to be honest. Together with our Gender Council, we have been highlighting this issue for almost every year around the 25th of November. It's been our theme on the 25th of November, which is the International Day to End Violence Against Women. And repeatedly, every year, every single year, this issue was the one that my colleagues at the Gender Council were bringing up as the most important issue. And this Gender Council is composed of women and men journalists from all across the world. So first, I think it's important we define what we hear by online or online abuse. For us, it includes the sharing of online of embarrassing or cruel content about a person, account impersonation, doxing, stalking, and electronic surveillance, as well as the non-consensual use of photographs and violence threats spread online. It's been experienced by journalists all across the world, women and men. But what we've noticed is that, and this is probably not news to you, women receive a lot of gender-based violence, lots of rape threats, for example, lots of comments about their physical appearance. Women journalists who identify themselves as feminists tend to receive even more abuse. And also women identified as LGBTQI+, or members of religious and ethnic minorities. We take this issue very seriously because actually many journalists who've been killed, you know that we publish every year a list of journalists killed across the world. 10 women journalists were killed last year. And actually many journalists who get killed have received online threats before they got killed. And this is the case in Europe of Daphne Caruana Galizia, for example, who was killed, a Maltese journalist who was killed a couple of years ago. Another very important aspect of our work has been to document the case. You cannot start a campaign on such an important issue without providing proper data. So we conducted a number of surveys. The first one was in 2017. It was a survey about violence against women journalists. So it was wider than online abuse. And we found out that 44% of the respondents had experienced online abuse. And the study showed that only one newsroom out of 5 had adopted some form of policy against violence in general. Then we conducted a more specific survey in 2018 looking at online violence of women journalists. And the study showed that over 60%, 64% to be precise, of the respondents had experienced online violence. Only half of them had lodged a complaint, either to their union, to their media, or to the police. And in 2/3 of the cases, nothing was done. Absolutely nothing was done. So as a response, we published a couple of guidelines for media and unions on how to tackle this phenomena. And I can actually share it with you later on. What is alarming, and the last survey we did was in 2022, where we surveyed our unions and media to look at what kind of initiatives had been launched by unions to tackle the issue. And almost 80% of them told us that they were aware that their members had received online abuse, but a minority had taken some clear initiatives to tackle online abuse, and I'll get back to this later. And only a fifth of the respondents said that media had adopted a protocol or a mechanism to tackle online abuse. So that's in 2022. So as you can see, there's a lot of work that still needs to be done. And I'm aware that there are plenty of other studies, plenty of other initiatives that are taking place across the world to tackle this issue. Why? Because the situation is pretty alarming. It's a clear attack on free speech, especially on women journalists, and on freelance women journalists. We found out as well that freelance female journalists are particularly targeted. And they are more vulnerable, and very often they don't work in the newsroom, they work from home, they have less contact with their colleagues, so they feel very isolated when these abuse happen. It leads to a lot of self-censorship, as you can imagine, and maybe you have experienced it yourself. And actually, sometimes this self-censorship also comes from pressure from families who are afraid of what their relative is going through. It has a chilling effect on witnesses. In the blog we published last week, we were explaining that this Indian journalist who had been targeted online, earlier on, she had stood up together with her male colleagues in support of another female journalist who had been harassed online. And she actually was the only one who received abuse online following her supporting tweet. Another aspect of it is that less journalists tend to report online abuse because it happens all the time. So it seems, unfortunately, to still be perceived as part of the job. And for us, it's actually absolutely not part of the job. This should never be considered as part of the job. And it's probably because it's considered as part of the job that nothing really is done in newsrooms. One of the things also that concerns us is that media organizations are not doing enough to tackle the issue. They are aware of the issue, but they're not adopting any protocols. They're not adopting any mechanisms. There are lots of things that are pretty free, cheap to put in place, and that could be very helpful for journalists, such as, for example, the handling of social media accounts. You know, that's the first thing to do when a journalist is abused, is to handle the social account to someone else, so that the journalist is released from all this responsibility and all this anger. So, for example, that's something that is rarely put into place. So what we need really is a clear support for the victims. So online abuse is not experienced the same way if you are isolated or if you are supported. We need more awareness-raising campaigns. We need clear commitments from newsrooms. We need clear responsibility from social media platforms, who should be held accountable for the content that they publish. We need governments to ratify International Labour Organization Convention 190, which is a convention that addresses violence and harassment in the world of work, and which has a specific provision on online abuse. And why do we need this convention to be ratified? Because if it is, then member states are obliged to put in place, to adopt certain legislations and to force employers to take initiatives to tackle violence at work, violence in the workplace. And for us, it would also mean that online violence would be considered as a health and safety issue with the consequences that such an issue deserves. And we need also digital safety training. It seems simple to say it, but actually many journalists across the world lack this kind of training. And it's one of the first steps to make sure that they can protect their accounts. They understand how to change regularly their passwords. I'm sure if I ask around, very few journalists actually change their passwords regularly. So there are simple steps like this that need to be put in place. But of course, there's a very important role that can be undertaken by unions in organizing these digital safety trainings. To finish, I just wanted to highlight some of the initiatives that have been taken by some of our members across the world to tackle the issue. There are more and more initiatives taking place, and it's very satisfactory, actually. In Belgium, for instance, our association has been standing up in legal cases in support of their members. They've been covering the fees, and there have been a number of wins, actually, legal wins, where the harassers have been identified and punished. In the UK, our union has launched a video, amongst other things, with testimonials from different journalists on what it is like to be harassed, to raise public attention. In Canada, our union has launched on the 16th of February a report on the state of harassment of journalists in the country, and it highlights how journalists and media workers are often exposed to harassment, especially of a racist and sexist nature. And it also shows that women workers of color, indigenous workers, and LGBTQI+ workers are disproportionately affected by harassment and online threats. And in Pakistan, our union has signed a petition against online abuse against women journalists back in 2020. And since then, they have organized a couple of trainings on online safety. And the IFJ has also created in Pakistan, the Women Media Forum Pakistan, which is a network of women journalists across Pakistan. And it has conducted 2 Twitter spaces on online abuse and its effects on mental health. As a conclusion, I would say that it's very important to not underestimate social dialogue, the importance to talk to media employers. I think it should always be there. It should be, we should constantly, as unions, address this issue with media employers. And I think a first result of this has been the work done by European federations, such as the EFJ, but also other federations representing actors, musicians in the audiovisual sector, together with media employers in the audiovisual sector. They have adopted, I think it was at the end of last year or beginning of this year, a new framework of action on gender equality, which has specific provisions, specific recommendations to tackle online abuse, including adopting protocols and reinforcing the need for social media to enforce their notice and take down provisions. So I think that's a very good sign. And I was lucky enough to be part of these discussions at the time. And I think it was a real eye-opener for our counterparts in the media, in the audiovisual sector, to hear about the threats that our colleagues were facing sometimes on a daily basis. And it was really the start, I think, of something new on online harassment and our discussions in the social dialogue context. So that's all for the moment. If you have any questions for later on, I'll be happy to answer them. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Pamela. And I'm sure there will be some questions. I just noted as a very important issue that this culture of silence is still there in the newsrooms, and it's getting harder and harder to break it, which is a bit frustrating, but still this is a signal that we need to tackle this in the strongest way possible. And I also think it's quite interesting, the point that you make about the combination of social dialogue and pressure exercised to employers through social dialogue about it, including public service media, because I think that you'd agree that in more than a few cases, maybe protocols are there, but not applied properly. So I think this is something that we can further discuss later. But for now, I would like to give the floor to Elodie Vialle. Elodie, welcome. Elodie is a digital expert specialized with a focus on online harassment and gender issues. And Pamela mentioned earlier how big the responsibility of big social media platforms is on the issue. And I know that this is the field that you focus your work recently, and that you proposed a model of escalating ways to escalate our responses and our reactions. So would you please explain to us what could we do in this ocean of hate speech that we have to face through social media, and especially gender-based hate speech?
Thank you so much, Yannis, and apologize for joining this important conversation lately. Indeed, I have a journalistic background, and I've been a press freedom defender for over the last few years, and focusing on online harassment of journalists. And over the last years, I've been trying to work on building these escalation channels for journalists being attacked online and with social media platforms. The problem today is that you're a journalist, you're attacked online, and there's harmful content against you, and you try to report the situation, and we advise journalists to report the situation to the platforms, but then nothing happens. And in many situations, this offline violence can lead to online violence. Daphne Caruana Galizia was harassed online in Malta before being murdered. And we've observed in so many countries that a lot of offline violence leads to physical attack. If you're being called XYZ in some contexts, it can lead to offline attacks. And so the physical and the digital are intertwined. So there's a need, and also in terms of reputation damage and all the risk, to reach out to someone within the platforms. But today, these solutions don't exist, or they exist, but actually it doesn't work that much. In many countries, it's really complicated to get access to someone to the platforms, because this is not their interest to provide this kind of access. It's difficult for them to provide a customer service for 3 billion of users. And also, I think there is a need to explain what journalism is to the folks within the platform, and why journalism matters, why it's important to protect journalists who are the pillars of democracies. And so the project and the research, and I would say the multi-stakeholder process I'm working on, is to try to build this connection and this dialogue with the platforms to make sure that journalists get access through organizations supporting them to this kind of service. So in concrete terms, it means that if you're harassed online through an organization like a union of journalists, you can get access to the platforms to get some support, to get some help, and to make sure that they take action. Because in many contexts, if they don't understand, if they don't have someone in the country, if they don't understand what is happening, they don't take action. And once again, we observed in many different contexts that it can lead to severe consequences for the journalist. So in terms of the process, a lot of some media outlets today get also this kind of connection, and the idea is to say that, okay, what the New York Times gets, that's cool for the New York Times, that's great for them, but we would like this kind of service to be more scalable and democratized for a lot of journalists. And there's a lot, so this is of course very difficult, because today it's really difficult to ask the platforms to do something. But what I did, and with other organizations supporting journalists, is to have discussions, workshop, conversation with the platforms, not only people who are working on the policy side, but also trust and safety practitioners who are also working on building these tools. And based on some pioneer experience from civil society organizations, from media outlets, from organizations defending journalists, the goal is to make this system more scalable for everyone. So basically, it's like creating a customer service for journalists harassed online, and ask the platforms to cooperate on doing this.
Do you think that this actually can be integrated into the self-regulation framework that we constantly defend as journalists and as unionists? Or do you think that it could impose further questions on restriction of free speech, or all this usual rhetoric when it comes to controversial decisions on content distributed through the platforms?
There are a lot of initiatives currently about, and discussions about, the need to create social media council, for instance, like we have the press council. But as we know, it doesn't always solve the solution. But today, I know that this is really frustrated, but today there is no dialogue between the journalists, the media sector, and the platforms, or not a lot. It's very complicated to establish this. And the platforms are the public square, and this is where the democratic processes and the dialogue happens. So we have no other choice than building this dialogue. I don't think that this system, the goal is to prioritize some cases, is to give some context about some cases. Like today, fact checkers, the work they do, they provide context to some contents to debunk disinformation. So in many contexts, when a journalist is harassed, even if we have death threats, even if we have very harmful content, the platforms say, this content doesn't violate the community standards, or the platforms don't even reply. What we want is just some cases to be prioritized. It's just that we acknowledge that if we have anything happening in this country, and we have an organization that can provide context. Today, the platforms, they don't even listen to it. They don't take these cases, because actually it's just perceived as a safety for them. Is just a layer of cost. So they have no immediate interest in doing that. But their interest is also to comply with the European regulation, with the Digital Services Act, with the Media Freedom Act, and all this, the Digital Services Act, of course, in particular. And part of the DSA is to reinforce the rule of trusted flaggers, is to reinforce the dialogue between the platforms and civil and organization supporting human rights defenders and journalists. And so their best interest is also to comply with this regulation. So, yeah.
Yeah, of course, but through the work that was done about disinformation within the EU perspective, I don't think that the results have been as encouraging as we initially believed. But I certainly agree that this is the framework that we need to work with. There is, of course, an extra task for everybody included in this discussion, and it's pointed out by our colleague from Pakistan, Lubna, and it's about the involvement of artificial intelligence in this spreading of hate speech or threats. Very shortly before I go on with Sophia, and it's a question both to you, Pamela and Elodie, do you think that AI would deteriorate the situation when it comes to harassment? Do you think that it would be easier for people to spread threats against female journalists using artificial intelligence tools? Elodie?
I think AI, we have both possibilities, you know. It can create some kind of automation of the online harassment, and so this is clearly a bad thing for harassment of journalists. But at the same time, AI can also help us to create some kind of system to detect hate speech. For instance, we have some tools that can help us to for individuals, to some applications, to pick up the level of toxicity of content they are ready to see and observe online, because the problem of hate speech is that we don't want necessarily to censor the hate speech, because we have, if you're a journalist and you receive a death threat, you have to be able to see what the kind of message you receive in terms of safety, but also discussing with some journalists, they want to know what people say also about what they do and their publication. So there's a need also maybe to use this kind of system to create tools that can also better help us to protect the journalists harassed online. So, but as always, the problem here is that we have technologies goes much faster than our possibility to digest them and to think about them. And in the meantime, journalists are at the front line of these attacks and this technology revolution. So just getting this kind of conversation is, of course, super important.
Thank you, Pamela. I know that IFJ has recently created a working group about artificial intelligence and the impact on journalism. Is the issue of online harassment cases included in the agenda of this working group in any way?
It's actually something that is going to be included on the agenda. It's a very important issue, but I would take this from a different angle. I would look at the content that is generated by artificial intelligence, because we know that this content is often gender biased. And one of the issues we have with online abuse is the narrative that is used by media in general to talk about gender-based violence. We are concerned that gender-based violence is not necessarily well tackled or objectively tackled, qualitatively tackled by media organizations. So we take this issue of artificial intelligence with a lot of care, because we understand that it's revolutionary, that it can truly help journalists, but we have to be aware of the narrative behind artificial intelligence and the damaging impact it can have on gender equality. So my approach would be more news content wise. We are very careful about that, and that's probably also one of the angles of our future work in the AI group.
Thank you, Sophia. I wonder whether you were already familiar with all this discussion before you have been targeted and harassed online because of your reporting, or have you in any way expected something like this to happen? Would you please go on and share your experience and explain to us what of all these measures that you have just heard was there for you when it happened?
So good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for inviting me to this very important webinar. I say very important because I heard a lot of things by Pamela and Elodie that I had no idea that even existed. and not back in 2016 when I was working in the field in Idomeni, which was the largest makeshift refugee camp in Europe back in 2016. And I was, not trained, and I was not ready for what happened back then. But I'm here to share not only my experience in the field, but the experience of other journalists that I had the chance to work side by side, or I had the chance to discuss with them what happened back then at a later stage. I will start by my own experiences. It was not as hard as probably Mariana's. Mariana Karakoulaki is with us today, and she was heavily targeted back then. It was I was reporting on the refugees' plight, and then at some point I got a message from what I thought back then was a friend of mine, a university scholar that of Greek origin that used to work in the States, and now he's somewhere in Europe, saying, calling me different names. I don't wish to reveal his name as he's not here and he cannot support himself in any sense. He wrote me first name, calling me different names. I don't want to, to speak about it too much. And he claimed that I was promoting the invasion of Islamists and Daesh fighters in Greece. He also claimed that I was an agent of some Arabic country because I was speaking Arabic to the people in the field. And he went on blocking me on Facebook and the other social media that we used to interact. And I have learned from mutual friends that he was calling them to say that they should be very careful of me because I was some kind of of threat to the national security of Greece. I was both surprised and angry at the time, but I didn't do anything because I was too busy in the field. And the fact that he also blocked me on these different social media that we used to interact, made me, like I didn't want to, to go on with that. A few weeks later, I started getting weird messages from profiles that were obviously fake, not people, that they hide themselves behind different profiles, called me again names for my reporting on refugee issue. They used words, very heavy words, and they cursed my mother and my family. Then I was angry and I started replying to some of them, but the minute I replied, they blocked me. I thought for a moment to take further action, maybe to go to the police, for instance, and ask for help by the special squad that is tackling with online attacks. But again, I was too busy and I said reporting comes first. Only once I consulted a police officer who I knew since a child about a death threat that I received for a report on a Yazidi man that his wife was kidnapped by ISIS Daesh fighters, and he was traveling alone to find his son in Germany. This message contained a lot of things that were relevant to my movement in the camp, so I felt a bit threatened because the person that wrote it obviously knew where I was going and what I was doing in the field. Coming to think about it now, I should have done more, but I didn't know what to do. I heard Pamela saying that that about this campaign, you are not alone, and I'm so happy about it. I wish there was some kind of action back then, or I knew about some kind of action like this in 2016. The only thing I did is to limit what words could be used in the comments in my Facebook account. But enough about me, because I met a lot of female journalists, as I said, in the field. And they had also experienced negative audience feedback that went beyond mere critique for their work, and instead often took the form of harassment, targeting them personally with a focus on their gender and sexuality. As they told me, they felt strong pressure to engage online as part of their job and often felt they had no choice but to face the harassment. They also felt that they had little support and little training, like me, on how to handle the abuse. Some also reported that they felt tension over harassment and opted to ignore the abuse or refrain from engaging on social media as a result. One of the reporters in the field that certainly didn't refrain from engaging on social media as a result of the attacks she had been receiving on her Twitter account, both while reporting on the name issue with what is now North Macedonia, then the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia, and the refugee issue, is Mariana Karakoulaki, which is currently based in the UK pursuing academic research. I asked Mariana if I could use her story, and she agreed, so that's why I'm using her name. Mariana had been receiving threats of all kinds while she was reporting on the refugees in Idomeni, Lesbos, and elsewhere, mainly by accounts with a far-right profile. She was threatened with rape and even death, and one of the messages, and these messages are still here, she has all of them, suggested that Thessaloniki is a small city and they could easily send people of the Golden Dawn, the far-right party that was later banned in Greece, at her front door. Far-right accounts in Greece and the nationalists in North Macedonia was attacking her in the case of her reporting on the name issue, depending on how the name of the country was written in her reports. I forgot to mention that Mariana was writing for foreign media. They threatened her even with lynching or for the fact that her name sounded too Turkish. Karakoulaki sounds a little bit Turkish to some people. I asked Mariana what she did to respond, and she said that the golden rule is that you don't normally respond to trolls and to personal threats, but generally speaking, sometimes it depends on how serious you think these threats are. Mariana was massively attacked in 2020 in Twitter, and then some of her friends on Twitter rushed to her support. They tracked the man behind the attacks, and they wrote to him that they would reach his employer and inform him or her on what he was doing. It was only then that he stopped, and he didn't send any more messages to her. This man was actually living and working in Germany. Two other Greek female journalists from the Greek TV with whom I had the chance to talk about this issue have told me that they use different methods as World Theater on Facebook to avoid sexist comments. One of them also thinks that the followers and the likes that she's getting on her social media is not merely for her work, but for her looks, as the comments she's getting is how beautiful or sexy she is. One time she was slammed by one of her followers for the fact that she didn't respond to his flirting, and since then she decided to use all kinds of filters available on social media to avoid such kind of behaviors. I think that in northern Greece, and I'm not speaking about the whole country as I'm not familiar with what is going on in Athens or other places in the south of Greece, there is no training at all on how to handle abuse and no backup with harassment when harassment happens. I wish the union I belong to, and as a journalist working in this part of Greece, or even my supervisors had a concrete policy on these issues. I'm sure that if I would seek their help, they would probably give it to me. But the issue is that why don't we do something in advance? I don't recall any seminar being organized for women working in the field during the refugee crisis or the women that were sent to war as correspondents. It's not enough to discuss these issues. We need training, and we need to be aware of the tools and the options at hand when we come across situations like the ones I have mentioned before. It's quite interesting that sometimes women journalists feel a lack of freedom to report abuse or feel that their news organizations see this as a personal problem, which is obviously not. But again, if there is training and if employees are given guidelines as well or are more involved in a sense, we might create a safer online environment for us women journalists. That's why I think that all this that is being discussed now, it should be distributed in some sense to all journalists. I don't see a lot of my colleagues here in Thessaloniki attending this seminar because, okay, it's 5 o'clock, 5 to 6, it's a rush hour for us journalists. here in Thessaloniki. But anyway, they should know that, there are platforms and there are tools that can help them be safe while working online. That's all from me. And thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you, Sophia, for the very straightforward way that you shared all this information and the story of our colleague Maria as well. And I think that I should absolutely agree with you that it's a matter not just for the unions to take care, but all the journalist community. I mean, we need to stay in touch with the actual need for training. And I truly hope that this is something that the safety center, that the safety training center we established, and you are also a part of it, will try and do in the future. I have one question for you. You mentioned that you realize that you need not to reply, that this is the golden rule, as you said. But at the same time, I find it extremely hard to disengage yourself from all this hostility. So when it comes to your mental well-being, was it actually affected by this? Were you able to deliver at that time?
Well, it was very hard, but had I tried to engage in all this, would make things even worse for me. I know myself and the way I react to these things. So I think I would feel more pressure on that if, the discussion, got deeper with these people. And Pamela, I think it was Pamela that talked about self-censorship. Yes, a lot of times in the field, I self-censored myself so that I am not in the position, I don't find myself in the position to get attacked by all these trolls in the different social media, which I'm not very proud of it, I have to say, but it was, some kind of protection to my own mental health at the time.
Yeah. So, Sophia, I would like to, as we are going to conclude in 5 minutes, I would like to ask all three speakers for a very short final remark. And in particular, we could use a clear suggestion for topics that we should try and develop training courses for. What would be your number one? How would you prioritize, Pamela?
Well, as I said, I think digital safety is a very important issue, but you also mentioned protocols and the fact that they may not be known by journalists in the media. And to me, it's very important that to maybe also get the skills to develop those protocols and make sure that all workers are involved in developing these protocols, because very often you get policies adopted in the media and they're adopted by very few people and expected to be implemented by the rest of the newsroom. And this is impossible. It's like every single campaign. If you want people on board, you need to involve them from the very start. And additionally, I think many people in newsroom don't have a clue on how to deal with online abuse, don't have a clue on how to support their peers. So definitely my advice is digital safety and adopt protocols and involve everybody in the newsroom.
Thank you, Pamela. Elodie?
Yes, +1 to what Pamela says. Regarding the trainings, every journalist should get access to these trainings. It's not only, I would say, it's holistic safety, because the physical, digital, the psychological safety are really intertwined here. And in terms of protocols, I work with newsrooms, in particular in France, on setting up and implementing protocols with them. And I totally agree. Most of the time, people have set up protocols for harassment or cybersecurity, or maybe something else. And so we have to, I hate this expression, but we have to think out of the box here, because online harassment is a mix of all these things plus the editorial. So what I try to do is to gather in the room HR people, editor-in-chiefs. In some newsroom, they have access to a medical center or something like that. Security, cybersecurity, all these folks in charge. And also some people, editors-in-chief of social newsroom, these kind of things, people who were first doing more engagement on social media, and trying to, based on existing cases that happened internally, and most of the time they didn't know how to handle this, then build protocols upon this, based on all the great protocols mentioned by Pamela that all international organizations we've been working on. And then try to set up these protocols, then do the trainings with the team. And after that, look back to the management to see, okay, what works, what doesn't work, because we have to be very flexible here. We have these protocols, but at the same time, everything is so new in this field. So top management and newsroom leaders have also to acknowledge this, but I always say that this is their legal responsibility to, this is a new systematic risk for journalists. They are targeted as person, but because they are journalists. And I think we have to be very strong on this also with newsroom leaders.
Thank you, Elodie. Sophia, any proposal that you would like to see as a point of the agenda of our next meeting, maybe?
I think that Pamela and Elodie has, proposed all the things that I would want to see as a journalist here in Greece. And plus, I would like to have the opportunity to discuss more with colleagues from abroad and exchange thoughts and ideas on different issues that concern women that work in the journalistic sector. To have the opportunity for, to get involved in such a discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Sophia. Professor Panagiotou, would you like to make some concluding remarks before we close this meeting and thank the speakers?
Yes, I would like to thank the speakers. I would like to thank Mr. Kotsifos for the effort placed, and also would like to thank the audience for being so active and contributing to the discussion. It was very valuable comment. And I think that, this webinar, just to let you know, is the kickoff event regarding a topic that the International Center for the Protection of Journalists and other professionals of media will. Thank you very much. Happy 4th of July for those of you that might celebrate it. Otherwise, thank you.
Thank you, Professor, and I would like to thank all of you, in particular our speakers, Sophia, Pamela, Elodie. Thank you for your contributions, and thanks to all of you who were there, and hope to meet again around some virtual table to discuss these or to further develop some training according to the proposals that we just heard by our speakers. Thanks a lot for joining us. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank
Have a nice
you.
day. Bye-bye.
Thank you.